Welcome to the Pasho Perspective, a place where I share my perspective on everything in the space between life and death. I'm your host, Pasho. Well, my Pachos, Chachos, today I have for you a treat. Yesterday or a couple days ago, Joe Rogan had posted Paul Harvey's If I Were the Devil, which was produced in 1965. For those of you who don't know, Paul Harvey was a journalist, and he made a couple of predictions that I think you will find very interesting and, ironically, like my last podcast on the Jaffe Report, again, made in the 1960s. It's almost like they knew something was coming into America, or should I say, they knew something wicked this way comes. So I'm going to put in the link a YouTube video where you can actually hear, because it's more of a recording and audio than it is a visual. And you can hear the entire thing read, but for today's purposes, I am going to break it down. And that's why this episode is titled The Gross Reality of If I Were the Devil. So to begin, it starts. If I were the devil, if I were the Prince of Darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. And I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population. But I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. Now, before I continue on, I did a little research, if you don't mind, and turns out that 44% of single home families are being bought out by hedge fund companies. And it's amazing that if you go to Google, there's 2 pages worth of material to dismiss it as some sort of conspiracy theory. However, I have a question of my own. If it is a conspiracy theory, then why last year did Representative Adam Smith, Democrat of Washington, and Senator Jeffrey Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, introduce the End Hedge Fund Control of American Homes Act of 2023? Kind of seems like it is a real thing. And everyone knows, and of course, Google and all of the liberal media is going to try to protect their master, BlackRock, but they are buying up a bunch of housing in order to skyrocket the price of homes. If you've ever tried to buy a house, you know within the last 3 years, it has gone up dramatically. When I was a landlord of a condominium that I owned when I met my wife and we moved into a home, the rent went up dramatically. And that's why we sold it, because, we didn't want to be those kinds of people who always had to tell our tenants who were friends of ours that it needs to keep going in order for fair value, market value and all that stuff. And so, it also increases the amount of rent, as I have already, kind of hinted at. And it kind of reminds me of the 2016 World Economics Forum in Davos, where a person said, "You will own nothing and like it." Continuing on. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, "Do as you please." Which again, I'm going to pause because that is the mantra of the progressive liberals, right? Slay queen. Do as you wish. Do what you want. It's your body. It's your whatever. And just let me remind you that there was an angel in heaven who fell from grace because of the exact same attitude. I want to do whatever I want. So that is not a mantra of our Lord. That is Satan's mantra. Do as you please. Go against the will of our Father, of our Creator. And since we are made in his likeness, isn't that what the devil would want us to do? To rebel against God as he did by doing whatever we wanted instead of following God's will. So it reminds me of a demonic ritual. It reminds me of abortion. Kill your child for yourself. It's not convenient for you. It's not the right time for you. And so, as opposed to what my Father, our God above, says, to sacrifice yourself for your family, or more importantly, to sacrifice yourself for him as he did for us when he sent down his only begotten son to die on a cross to give us salvation, society is pushing the devil's mantra. Do whatever you want. Screw your neighbor, screw anybody else, and certainly forget about the Lord above. Next paragraph. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's good is bad and what's good is square, meaning a euphemism for being lame or not cool. And the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. So a couple of notes there. To the young, only book actually banned from public schools is the Bible. You can have plenty of child pornography. You can have stories of the rainbow alphabet soup, doing inappropriate things to each other. I mean, in the state of Florida, they call it censorship instead of preventing smut from being shown to children at a very inappropriate age. And then the Our Father, which art in Washington, reminds me of how sacred the welfare system is in our country. Welfare and other entitlement programs account for $800 billion, which equates to about 46% of our debt. Imagine how much money America could save if we stopped giving willing, able-bodied people money just for existing, instead of asking them to contribute to society, to sacrifice their comfort and themselves and work and contribute to the world instead of just taking what they feel they are entitled to take. So what do I mean by entitlement programs? I mean things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, and those equate more than any other spending, more than defense spending. Now, I don't remember where I heard it, but somebody, probably from the Daily Wire, mentioned something that, as soon as the welfare state was created in the New Deal, we basically gave people the right to vote in order to receive other people's hard-earned tax dollars. And there are articles, if you look it up, although again, you're going to have to go digging to like the third or fourth page, where they even admit that people vote against their own beliefs and values specifically to maintain and receive the welfare checks that they have grown so accustomed to use. It reminds me of the quote from The Matrix when Morpheus tells Neo, there are some people plugged in and so inured in the system that they would be willing to fight to preserve it. And who can blame them, right? Who wants to go work when everything has been given to you, everything has been paid for, you get to sit on your couch and smoke pot and do whatever it is that you want to do. And then, these people, they're not dumb, they're ambitious. And so they will lie to the government on the forms, receive our hard-earned tax dollars, and then start another side business where they get only cash, don't pay any taxes, and get to drive Land Rovers, Mercedes, and BMWs, and swipe as they step out of those vehicles in the parking lot of a grocery store their food stamp card so that we, the American people and the taxpayer, are footing that bill. Illegals are receiving taxpayer dollars. 3 out of 5 illegal aliens who break into this country, which now I believe there's over 5 million since Joe Biden has taken over the country, are all receiving taxpayer dollars. Now, it is true that they do not receive welfare checks, but they still get it through other public services such as schooling, health. Even the state of California is trying to pass a law, if they haven't already, where they're going to give illegal aliens free health care. Not the American citizens who live in California. They still have to work like a bunch of scrubs and pay their taxes so that California can then take that money and give it to the illegal alien who illegally border jumped into our country. basically signaling to us that they don't care about our laws. They're not going to follow our laws. They'll commit crimes if they want because we don't even know they're here. So how will we find them? How would we even know to look for them? Seems pretty awful, but I digress and we continue. And then I would get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. So a couple of notes there. The lurid literature would be things like Lawn Boy, where there are graphic images of boys sucking on other boys, or the book Flamer, or the book Genderqueer, which are all perverted alphabet soup rainbow propaganda to manipulate and corrupt and pervert and indoctrinate our children to follow those things. And again, going back to the Jaffe memo, in an attempt to control the human population, because the less amount of people there exists, the easier it is to corral and control. The more people there are, the more likely to rebel, the less able the government is to control them because there's so many. It seems pretty terrible to me. And then going to the peddling of narcotics, I recently just looked this up. Over 241,000 pounds of fentanyl has been brought into our country. And fentanyl is not the only problem. There's also a new drug in Pennsylvania called Trank, which makes everybody walk around like zombies, which seems pretty nuts. Continuing on. Oh, wait, I have some notes on that. So, pill popping, right? How bad is it in the United States? 48% of men take prescription pills until the end of their life. Women, 60%. The U.S. spends more money on the top 20 prescription pills than all the other countries on the globe combined. That's how reliant we are because of anxiety, because of depression, because of insomnia. Instead of dealing with the actual problems that may be causing those things, medicate it. Why? Because Big Pharma wants you to spend money so that they can become richer. So obviously, the only solution that anybody in the liberal media progressive community is going to do is try to make a profit off of you. They're going to take advantage of the fact that you are having these issues, and instead of actually finding the root cause of it and thus fixing it, they're just going to medicate you, numb you into oblivion to where you don't pay any attention. You don't pay any attention to the addiction, and you don't pay any attention to all of the tomfoolery that's happening in this country, like the open border, and like let's just say Joe Biden, because that kind of surmises everything else. Continuing on. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let them run wild until before you know it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. It's no coincidence that most of the school shootings and awful mass murders that have happened over the last couple of years under Joe Biden's administration all identify as trans. And so that trans ideology is perverting people. And the fact that newer generations can't agree with older generations that a man cannot be a woman, but that they would fight to the death to defend a delusion is splitting up families. Churches have been separated through the Great Schism from the Catholic Church. And the Great Schism, I mean, how many schisms have there been from the Catholic Church? Well, these are only a few. The Adventists, the Anglicans, the Baptists, the Calvinists, the Evangelicals, the Lutherans, the Methodists, the Pentecostals, the Presbyterians, the Quakers. I could go on. But they split Christ's church. They split the Catholic Church. Just look at the history of England, right? With the Church of England, that's the only thing that the monarchy is actually in charge of. If they're even in charge of that, they're just symbols, right, of that old ancient power. And so there's the broken church at war with itself, the nation at war with themselves with BLM. Look at Spain, look at Germany, where the people are rising. They're finally starting to see and rising against the socialist agendas of their countries. Continuing on. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. That should be obvious. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon, I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the House of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbols of Easter an egg and the symbols of Christmas a bottle, or some fat guy in a suit representing consumerism. So let's break that down. Deifying science is the whole trans ideology. It's critical race theory. It's the 1619 Project. Judges promoting pornography, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is a woman and a mother, couldn't even define what a woman was, and this woman sits on the highest court in the country. And more on Ketanji. She is known, and she was criticized during the interview process, for cutting the sentence in half for people who violated child pornography laws. She contended that because it is easier to access pornography, the punishment towards these sex criminals should be then reduced. Oof, is all I can say about that. Going then to luring priests and pastors, we have a couple examples already in the news. Father Rodolfo Martinez Guevara, who, let me read my notes here, is from Fairfax, Virginia. He is a member now of the school board. He was sworn in. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm jumping here. He had 600 images of children sex abuse, 600 images of child sex abuse material. Some of those children were under the age of 12, right? Again, going back to Father Rodolfo. There was another priest, so-called, from the Pennsylvania School Board. Or no. Again, I'm sorry, I have my notes a little outnumbered here. There's a Venetian priest, James T. Beagle of St. Louis, Missouri, who was found, he's a retired priest, who was found of having 6,000 pictures of, again, child sex abuse materials. He made 2 PowerPoints that apparently he was updating constantly. All right. So now let's get to those other names that I was talking about. We have in Congress already a couple of members, or not in Congress, but, the school board members that I was talking about, who were not sworn in on the Bible, thus killing God, but were instead sworn in on stacks of pornography. So now Carl Frisch from Fairfax, Virginia, who I was talking about, is now a member of the school board. I think he's a vice chair even. He's risen to such extent. Was sworn in on 5 LGBT books. The one where a boy sucks on another boy, the Lawn Boy book, was one of those books in that stack. And then, again, a Democratic school board member in Central Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Karen Smith, who also was sworn in on a stack of LGBTQ perverted graphic novel books as well. So, continuing on. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want until I had killed the incentives of the ambitious. Sounds like welfare and socialism to me. Karl Marx was quoted as saying, from each according to ability, to each according to their need, which just so happens that I'm pretty familiar with Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. I read the book and listened to it while I was reading last year. And it really reminds me of chapter 10, where the main character goes and looks for a character known as John Galt. And all these people are always asking, who is John Galt? And so she wanted to know. And so I hope you don't mind, but I went to the internet and, I don't want to read the whole chapter, but I found a synopsis from Cliff Notes, and I think you will find this to be very interesting. Again, this is chapter 10 from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It reads, the story that the hobo tells about the 20th century motor company is important for several reasons. First, Rand uses it to demonstrate the consequences of communism in practice. The primary question raised by a communist system is how an individual's needs can be determined. If a group permits each individual to determine his or her own needs, the group faces the daunting task of having to satisfy every person's desire. The problem is not necessarily that people are unscrupulous. The problem is that in such a case, there is no way to achieve objectivity. Does a man need a car or merely desire it? Does a woman require her house to be painted, or is a new coat of paint desirable but non-essential? Does a man need those books or musical recordings that he loves, which add so much meaning to his life? Who should answer such questions, and by what standard could they judge? Questions of need cannot be answered objectively. Need is a vague and undefinable term in this context. At the 20th Century Motor Company, the group voted to decide the needs of each individual, just as the group decided to the projected output of each worker based on ability. As a result, each individual was enslaved to the group. His income was determined by his ability to beg rather than by his productive effort. No worker could feel the pride that comes from earning money as a direct result of hard work. When income is severed from production, incentives necessarily wanes and productivity declines. When the factory's output dropped, the group determined that some people were not working in accordance with their ability. The group sentenced those people to work overtime without pay, of course, because income is based on need. Not surprisingly, the employees soon started to hate each other and to hide all signs of ability. And as a logical consequence, declining production condemned the factory to bankruptcy. Rand indicates that the worst evil of this communist ideal is that it rewards misery and punishes virtue. It ties a man's income to the number and severity of misfortunes that he and his family experience. It turns his productive ability into a curse, condemning him to ceaselessly toil for the satisfaction of his neighbor's unending desires. The more ability an individual shows, the more he is sentenced to unremitting slavery for the needy with no gain for his effort. Rand insists that this is the antithesis of a proper moral code, which celebrates the creation of abundance and rewards it by tying income directly to production. Man's life on earth is made possible by virtue of his productivity, not his suffering. Justice and the ability to live successfully require that a productive ability be the standard of determining a man's income, not his needs or pain. And just on a side note, it really makes me think about Alaskan Airline. Are they a victim of this type of mentality? Is the reason that the plane fell apart, to which they had warning signals 3 times prior to when the side of the airplane blew out, because they don't have enough skilled workers? Because instead they would rather hire under the DEI guys and try to make everything diversity, equity, and inclusion instead of who is most right for this job? And so it kind of makes me a little afraid to fly. How many other airlines who are embracing this ridiculous idea that because of your skin color, because of your sexual preference, because of your gender, you should get the job of being a pilot instead of, the people who went to pilot school and logged in enough hours to prove competency? Those are the people that I would want to fly, just like the people who went to school in aviation know how to fix, repair, and maintain an airplane. How is this possible? They knew about it, which is why the same plane was not used to go to Hawaii, because they were afraid it would crash into the water, but apparently they had no problem with it crashing into the ground or into a side of a mountain, or in this case, having the entire side, well, not the entire side, but a big portion of the side of an airplane falling off as they are 30,000 feet into the air. But I digress. Last paragraph. And what do you bet I could get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich? I would caution against extremes in hard work and patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, which means having lots of sexual partners, that what you see on TV is the best way to be. And thus, I could undress you in public. I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. And it makes me ask another question. If I wanted to destroy America, what would I do different than what Joe Biden is doing to our country now, with inflation, with the open border, with a weak foreign policy? So, the diseases like AIDS and monkeypox, the idea that marriage is old-fashioned, go back to the podcast where I talked about dinks who refuse to have children, OnlyFans, who are basically unmarriable because who wants a bag of chips that's already been opened with 100 hands in them? Men like a bag of chips that have that nice fresh air seal that they don't have to share with anybody else, because that's where the value is. The value is in the rarity. Okay. You can teach experience. You can teach what you like. You can't teach someone to be pure and innocent. going back to the beginning of promoting gambling, there are over 40 applications for gambling. To list some, but obviously not all because we don't have enough time. You have Bovada, Bet Online, Sports Betting, MyBookie, AllBet, DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Bet365, and of course, ESPN Bet, only to mention a few. In regards to cautioning against hard work, look at this entitled generation that have TikTok videos complaining about having to work 40 hours a week. Are you serious? Although I can understand, that even working 40 hours a week because of Joe Biden's policy and inflation and that your money means nothing, you really can't afford a home. No wonder you can't move out of the house until you're in your 30s, until you have established a certain degree, a certain level at your job to where you would be making more money. Destroying or cautioning against patriotism. Look at the 1619 Project that basically paints all of our history and all of our forefathers as a bunch of KKK racists, which is absolutely absurd. Swinging is more fun. Just look to OnlyFans. Look to the public teachers who are having sex with their children, with their students. It's disgusting and insulting to me, who am a teacher as well, that I have to share that title with all of these sick perverts. Undressing you in public. Look at AI videos that can now take any face and put you in any position that you would like. Think about the boys who got in trouble for taking one of their classmates who was a girl and making AI videos where they were doing inappropriate things to them. Think about the VR girl who was 12 years old who was gang raped by a bunch of perverts online through the virtual reality. This is not okay. This can't be sustained. This nation will die unless we do something about it. So I beg you, whoever is listening out there, vote better. If you vote for a Democrat because you're voting for welfare, you're also voting for the death of God. You're voting for the hunting down of Catholics and patriot Americans. You are disrespecting homeless veterans by replacing them with illegal aliens. Like in New York City, where they kicked out all the kids and told them, you now have to go on remote learning because we're going to use your school because it's too cold in New York City. We're going to use your school as a shelter for illegal border jumpers. There's something wrong in the state of Denmark. And it is up to you and I, my Pachos, Chachos, to do something about it, to speak up and to take action. I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless you. I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.